You need to understand your own limitations, Alara. Some people are built for stability, not strategy. Those words still echo in my mind like an insult dressed as advice. My brother Cale said them with that smug half-smile he always wore when he thought he was being wise. It was right before he voted, along with everyone else, to remove me from the Vance family investment group. He called my life quaint, said I was too cautious, too small-minded to understand high-level finance. Maybe it was the librarian job, the modest apartment, or the used car that made him think that. He didn't know that the very stability he bragged about depended on me. Stick with me while I share my story of quiet humiliation and ultimate vindication. And if it touches something in you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That day, the Vance family investment group met in the grand dining room of my father's estate. The chandeliers glowed, the mahogany table shone, and the air was thick with Cale's confidence. He was the golden boy, tailored suit, expensive watch, perfect posture. He started his presentation with slides full of charts and graphs that none of them really understood, but pretended to. Our portfolio's up 20% this quarter, he announced, grinning as if he'd done it all himself. My aunt clapped. My father nodded proudly. Everyone looked at Cale as though he was the second coming of Warren Buffett. I sat quietly, flipping through my notes. I'd seen those numbers before. Every return he showed came directly from Thorne and Citadel, the firm I'd personally appointed years ago to manage the core trust. But no one knew that. Not yet. Then Cale shifted gears. To ensure smarter management, I'm proposing a competency tier, he said smoothly. Those with limited financial understanding shouldn't have access to the full strategy details. It prevents confusion and protects the group. He didn't even glance at me at first. But when he did, his smile turned sharp. Alara, this would include you, of course. You've got a great heart, but numbers aren't your strong suit. The words landed harder than I expected. My mother's cousin gave me a pitying look. My aunt whispered something that made her pearls shake with laughter. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I said nothing. Cale's voice carried over the room. This isn't personal. It's just business. Everyone nodded. Everyone except me. I looked around the table at people living in mansions, driving luxury cars, all funded by the quiet stability I'd maintained behind the scenes. They thought I was small, but they were standing on foundations I built. That was the moment I knew. My silence had protected them long enough. It was almost time to remind Cale, and everyone else, just who really held the power in the Vance family. My life looked simple to everyone. I lived in a small apartment on the quiet side of town and drove an old silver Honda that sometimes made strange noises when it rained. People thought I was just a librarian who lived within her means, content with an ordinary life. But that wasn't true. I chose to live that way for a reason. It was a promise I made to my late grandfather, Alastair Vance. He was the true financial genius of our family, and he taught me everything I know about money, patience, and quiet strength. Before he passed away, he told me something I never forgot. Real power isn't in showing off, Alara. It's in knowing when to stay silent. So I stayed true to that. I lived simply, not because I had to, but because I wanted to honor him. I let everyone believe I was just the quiet sister, the one who didn't understand big numbers or bold strategies. When the next family meeting came, I already knew how it would go. Cale, my brother, always arrived first, full of confidence. He looked like success itself, tailored suit, shiny watch, that perfect smile that made people trust him instantly. The rest of the family admired him. To them, Cale was the smart one, the man who made things happen. He stood up at the head of the table, holding his tablet like a CEO presenting to investors. I've been reviewing our portfolio, he began, his tone full of authority. I suggest a strategic reallocation, moving millions from our high-growth tech companies into safe, dividend-paying utilities. It's smarter long-term management. I listened carefully, my stomach tightening with every word. The tech companies he wanted to drop were performing incredibly well. Their growth potential was clear. Moving the money now wasn't smart management. It was reckless. I couldn't sit there quietly this time. Cale, I said gently, don't you think it's too early to pull out of tech? Those stocks are still growing. Utilities are safe, but they won't give the same returns. The room went silent. Cale turned to me slowly and smiled, that cold, patronizing smile I knew too well. Alara, he said, his voice calm but cutting. Your world is built on thousands, not millions. You can't possibly grasp the nuance here. The family chuckled softly. My father gave a small nod, agreeing with Cale as if it were obvious. I felt the heat in my chest, but I forced myself to stay still. I'd learned long ago that silence could be stronger than shouting. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. A message from Silas Thorne, the portfolio manager who truly handled the family's funds. It read, urgent. Cale's reallocation request flagged as high risk. Approval pending your decision. I looked up at Cale, who was still basking in his own arrogance. He had no idea that the real power, the final say over every dollar, rested quietly in my hands. 6 years ago, I sat by my grandfather's bedside, holding his weak hand as he struggled to speak. Alistair Vance had always been a strong man, full of wisdom and quiet power. But that night he was frail, his voice soft and tired. Still, his eyes were sharp, and I could tell he had something important to say. Alara, he whispered, promise me you'll protect what I built. Promise me you won't let greed destroy this family. I felt my throat tighten. I promise, Grandpa, I said, and he smiled faintly. Then he told me something that changed everything. He had seen what I had seen, the arrogance growing in my father, the selfishness in Cale. They treated money like a game, chasing status and showing off their success. My grandfather feared that everything he had built would be ruined once he was gone. That night, he told me he had dissolved the old family trust. Instead, he left the entire core portfolio, worth $185 million, in my name alone. I was the only one he trusted to handle it wisely and honestly. He believed I understood the true meaning of wealth, that it was not about luxury or power, but about purpose and responsibility. When he passed away, the rest of the family thought the money was still under the same old system. They continued to meet, argue, and boast about their so-called investments. What they didn't know was that all their comfort, the houses, cars, and vacations, came from the portfolio returns that I quietly managed through Thorne and Citadel, the same firm my grandfather had worked with for decades. Every quarter, I approved distributions through them, payments that kept my family living comfortably. They thought it was the result of their collective fund, but it was really just my decision to keep them stable. None of them knew that Thorne and Citadel only took orders from me. I was the one reviewing the numbers, setting the limits, and approving the transfers. Cale, of course, loved to play the role of the genius investor. At every family meeting, he stood before everyone with charts and numbers, pretending they were his own. What he didn't realize was that those same reports came straight from Thorne and Citadel, the firm that sent them directly to me first. He would copy the information, rephrase it, and present it as his own achievement. The family clapped and called him brilliant, while I sat silently, knowing the truth. Sometimes, I wondered if my grandfather had known it would happen exactly like this, that Cale's pride would grow until it collapsed under its own weight. I never wanted to embarrass him or take away his confidence. I only wanted to protect what my grandfather trusted me with. But every time I saw Cale soaking in praise for work he hadn't done, I could feel the promise I made in that quiet study pulling at me again, reminding me that one day, the truth would have to come out. The message from Silas Thorne came late in the evening. I was sitting at my desk, finishing up some work, when my phone buzzed with an alert marked urgent. It was unusual. Silas rarely used that word. I opened the message, and as I read it, my heart began to pound. Cale had gone behind my back. Without any approval, he had contacted Thorne and Citadel directly and demanded a transfer of $50 million. He called it a ground floor opportunity, a carbon credit investment in the Brazilian rainforest. According to him, it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to make history. Silas's message continued. His team had already looked into the project and found too many red flags. The land surveys were fake, the business documents had been altered, and the promised returns were far beyond what was realistic. In simple words, it was a scam, one designed to lure greedy investors with big dreams and quick profits. I sat frozen, rereading the message. Cale had no authority to make such a request, but because he carried the Vance name, he thought people would obey him. His arrogance had finally gone too far. He wasn't just trying to prove a point anymore. He was about to throw away $50 million. Money that didn't even belong to him. I called Silas immediately. His calm voice came through the line, but I could hear the concern underneath it. "Miss Vance," he said, "Mr. Cale tried to pressure my team. He claimed to be acting on behalf of the family group. Of course, we didn't move a cent without your authorization. But I thought you should know," he seemed desperate. Desperate. That word stayed with me. Cale was always proud, always confident. But desperate? That meant something deeper was wrong. Still, this wasn't just about his personal problems anymore. This was a serious risk to the entire family's financial safety. The same safety I had quietly protected for years. I thanked Silas for stopping the transfer and asked him to forward me all the details. As I read through the documents, anger started to rise inside me. Cale hadn't even bothered to verify the project properly. He had been blinded by his need to look like a genius in front of the family. He wanted to make a grand move, something that would make everyone forget every small doubt about his leadership. But this time, it wasn't just about pride. If Silas hadn't stopped him, Cale's mistake could have wiped out years of careful growth. Everything my grandfather built, everything I had protected, would have gone up in smoke because of his carelessness. For the first time, I realized I couldn't keep staying silent. Cale's arrogance had crossed the line. This wasn't only about proving him wrong anymore. It was about saving the legacy my grandfather trusted me with, before Cale's pride destroyed it completely. The next quarterly meeting arrived, and I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing on me. Cale was already at the head of the table, beaming with that smug look he always wore. He was explaining his new tiered system, talking about how smart and forward-thinking he was, how everyone should follow his plan to maximize the family's profits. The family nodded along, impressed as always, unaware of the truth hidden right under their noses. As Cale droned on about his next big move, I realized I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Every reckless idea he had presented, every arrogant decision, had been quietly managed and corrected by me for years. My grandfather's trust, the portfolio, the family's safety, it all rested in my hands. It was time they knew. I stood, my voice calm but firm. Before you gamble another dollar, Cale, there's something the family needs to understand about where the money actually comes from. The room went silent. Even Cale's confident smile faltered for a moment as he glanced at me. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. I dialed Silas Thorne and put the call on speaker. The sound of his clear, authoritative voice filled the room. Silas, could you please clarify for the Vance Family Investment Group who the sole beneficial owner and decision-maker of this portfolio is? The room froze. Whispers began to ripple around the table, and Cale's face tightened, his usual ease replaced by something like panic. I didn't say another word, letting the moment stretch, letting the anticipation build. Through the speaker, Silas spoke with quiet authority. He outlined the truth. Every decision, every investment, every distribution had been approved and controlled solely by me. He explained that the portfolio was managed under the instructions of my grandfather's binding agreement, that I alone had final authority, and that no transfer or allocation could happen without my explicit approval. The shock was immediate. My father's mouth opened slightly, then closed. My aunt's hands trembled on the table. Cale's face turned pale, his confidence crumbling as he realized the foundation of his perceived authority had been nothing more than a sham. The room that had been filled with admiration for him only moments ago now hummed with disbelief and tension. I stayed calm, letting them absorb the revelation. This was the moment the balance of power shifted, the moment my quiet vigilance became visible. I had waited years for this, and finally the truth was out. Cale was no longer in control, and the family could see who had really been protecting them all along. Silas Thorne's voice filled the room, steady and commanding. The portfolio is managed under the exclusive directive of Ms. Alara Vance, per the binding contract established by the late Alastair Vance. All transactions, including the quarterly distributions you all receive, require her final approval. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. My father's jaw dropped, and he sat frozen, unable to speak. My aunt's hands fluttered nervously, and her lips moved as if she wanted to say something but couldn't form the words. Cale's face went pale, his usual arrogance wiped away entirely. For the first time, I saw him unsure, trapped by a truth he had never imagined. The world he had built for himself, the image of the brilliant investor, the family's golden boy, began to crumble right in front of him. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm even as my heart raced. Grandpa trusted me with this because he knew what I value most: honesty, careful judgment, and responsibility. He saw that greed and pride had taken hold of some of you. That's why he gave me full control of the portfolio. Not to punish anyone, but to protect everything he built. Cale shifted in his seat, trying to interrupt, but I raised a hand, signaling him to wait. I continued. The returns you've all admired and applauded? Those weren't Kale's decisions. They were mine. Every investment, every growth move, every correction, I handled it all quietly. He merely read the reports I received and presented them as his own. If he had been allowed to follow through with his recent plan, it would have cost the family millions. I looked around at the faces of my family. Some stared in shock, unable to comprehend what they were hearing. Some glanced at Kale, seeing him for the first time not as the smart, confident leader, but as a man blinded by arrogance, dangerously close to destroying everything. My father finally found his voice, but it was weak. Ilara, I had no idea. I nodded, not with triumph, but with quiet relief. I know. That's why I stayed silent for so long. I wanted to protect you all without anyone knowing. But Kale's actions crossed the line. He tried to use the family's money without permission. That's when it became necessary for the truth to be revealed. Kale's hands gripped the edge of the table. You've been controlling everything? All this time? Yes, I said firmly, my eyes steady on him. And I did it to keep the family safe, to honor Grandpa's trust. Your presentations, your so-called strategies, they were never in danger until you tried to override the rules. The portfolio, the growth, the distributions, all depended on careful, responsible decisions. That responsibility is mine. The room was silent for a moment, everyone absorbing the revelation. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For 6 years, I had carried the secret, protecting the family and the fortune quietly. Now, the truth was out, and the people who thought they knew everything were finally seeing reality. Kale's world had shifted, and for the first time, the power in the room belonged to me. Kale's face was red, his usual calm and polished demeanor gone. He was cornered, humiliated, and desperate. For the first time, I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully built image was crumbling. He shifted in his chair and pointed at me, his voice sharp and accusing. "You let us think you were poor," he shouted. "You sat there in your thrift store cardigans, pretending to be ordinary, while judging every one of us." I stayed calm, letting him exhaust himself. He wasn't just angry. He was trying to save himself by turning the blame onto me. Kale leaned forward, his hands slamming the table for emphasis. "You've been manipulating us all this time. You had the power to cut us off whenever you wanted. Is that the kind of person you want running the family's fortune? Someone who treats us like puppets." His words were meant to shock the family, to make them fear me, to make me look cruel and selfish. He wanted them to see me as a villain, as someone who had taken advantage of their trust and kept them dependent on his so-called generosity. But instead, it backfired completely. The family looked around at each other, slowly understanding the truth. They realized that, despite having the ability to punish or control them, I had never done so. Every allowance they received, every luxury they enjoyed, had come from my careful planning, my oversight, and my willingness to protect them quietly. I had the power to take it all away, but I chose not to. My father's eyes softened as he looked at me. My aunt stopped sputtering, her hands resting on the table in silence. Even Kale's closest supporters at the table began to shift uncomfortably. They could see now that the person they had tried to belittle had actually been the one keeping everything steady. The very money and comfort they had relied on were gifts I had chosen to give them, not rights they had earned. Kale's face fell as he realized what he had just done. He had tried to turn the family against me, but instead, he had revealed his own ignorance and arrogance. All his accusations, his claims of manipulation and deception, rang hollow in the room. Everyone could see that, even with complete control, I had acted responsibly, ethically, and with their best interests at heart. I spoke softly, letting the words reach them. I never lied to hurt anyone. I never used this power to control or punish. Everything you enjoyed, every comfort, was funded and approved by me, yes, but out of care, not cruelty. The room was quiet. Kale's desperate attempt to save face had failed completely. Instead, it made everyone see the contrast between his recklessness and my careful, protective decisions. I had the power, but I had never abused it. That truth sank in slowly, leaving Kale isolated, ashamed, and fully exposed before the family he had tried to impress for so long. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes fixed on Kale. "Why were you so desperate, Kale? Why all the WhatsApp groups, the unregistered brokers, and the secret deals?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. He hesitated, his pride struggling against the truth I was pressing him to admit. Sweat appeared at his temples, and he avoided eye contact, knowing the family was watching him closely. The room had gone silent again, everyone waiting for him to explain. Finally, under the pressure, the truth began to spill out. Cale's confident mask cracked. He admitted that his personal investments had gone terribly wrong. High-risk ventures he had taken on his own, hoping for fast, big returns, had failed completely. He was leveraged, owing huge amounts to people who would not hesitate to take severe action if he defaulted. The Brazilian carbon credit project was not a smart investment at all. It was a desperate attempt to cover his losses, a Hail Mary thrown in blind hope. He had planned to use the family's money, the portfolio he had no right to touch, as collateral, hoping to save himself without anyone realizing the danger. I could feel my heart tighten as I listened. This was beyond arrogance now. It was reckless, dangerous, and selfish. His need to appear brilliant and in control had pushed him to risk everything that generations of careful planning had built. He had nearly destroyed the family's financial security, all to cover his personal mistakes. I looked around at the family, who were beginning to understand the gravity of what Cale had done. They realized it wasn't just about taking credit or being proud. Cale had put them all at risk. Their lives, their homes, their comfort, all of it could have been lost because of his desperation. Cale's betrayal was now clear for everyone to see. He had not just been arrogant or reckless in front of the family meetings. He had been actively trying to gamble with their money for his own survival. It was a complete betrayal of trust. The person who was supposed to lead responsibly, to protect the family's wealth, had instead almost ruined it. I spoke calmly, letting the words sink in. Cale, this isn't just about pride or showing off. Your actions could have cost the family everything. You risked millions of dollars that weren't yours to play with, all to save yourself from debts you created. The room stayed silent. Cale lowered his head, unable to respond. For the first time, the family saw him not as the confident golden boy, but as a reckless man blinded by his own mistakes. Every decision, every risky move, every desperate scheme he had attempted became painfully clear. In that moment, it wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about showing the difference between care and recklessness, responsibility and arrogance. And everyone, finally, could see the stark contrast between his dangerous desperation and the careful protection I had quietly maintained for years. I looked around the room, letting everyone feel the weight of what had just happened. The time for explanations and apologies was over. It was time to set the rules clearly. From now on, I said calmly, the quarterly distributions will continue as they always have. But the Vance Family Investment Group, as it was, is over. There will be no more meetings, no more presentations, no more debates about who is qualified or not. That chapter ends here. I could see the shock on some faces and the relief on others. The tension in the room slowly shifted, but I wasn't done yet. I turned my gaze to Cale, who still looked pale and uncertain. Cale, you no longer have any access to this portfolio, financial or informational. You will receive nothing beyond the small, separate trust Grandpa left you. And as you know, you have already spent most of it. He opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand, stopping him. This is final. There will be no exceptions. The family's money and security are not tools for your mistakes, your pride, or your ego. My stewardship of this portfolio was a gift. It was never your right. You and everyone else took it for granted, assuming it would always be there, unquestioned and unchallenged. I paused, letting the words settle. The room was silent. Some family members looked guilty, others shocked. I continued, that gift now has boundaries. The family's financial well-being is secure, but entitlement is over. No one will ever assume control or influence beyond what has been set. Everyone must understand that security comes with responsibility, not arrogance. Cale's shoulders slumped. I could see the realization finally sinking in, that his reckless behavior and his sense of superiority had cost him the privilege he had taken for granted. He could no longer threaten, manipulate, or interfere. The control he believed he had was gone forever. I looked around the rest of the family, making sure they understood the new order. This is not about punishment, I said. It's about protecting the legacy Grandpa left and ensuring that the money is used wisely and responsibly. From now on, every decision, every distribution is guided by careful judgment. There is no room for games, for arrogance, or for risk that isn't measured and approved. I felt a sense of calm and clarity settle over me. The tension in the room began to ease as everyone absorbed the reality of the new rules. The family's security was safe, but the illusion of entitlement was gone. I had drawn a line, and it was clear, unmovable, and fair. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The chaos of deception and arrogance had ended. The family could move forward, but only within the limits I had set. The gift I had quietly maintained was no longer invisible, and the lessons Kale had ignored were finally clear to everyone. The new order was in place, and this time it would last. After everything was revealed, the family was different. Some of them looked grateful, even a little ashamed for the way they had treated me over the years. Others were quiet and distant, their resentment clear in the way they avoided eye contact or spoke in clipped tones. I didn't expect anything else. I had never hoped for praise or apologies. My only goal had been to protect the family and the legacy Grandpa left behind. I returned to my normal life, carrying the quiet relief of the secret finally being out. I still went to work as a librarian, arranging books and helping visitors, just like before. I still drove my old Honda, with its familiar creaks and rattles. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, I felt a calm strength I had never allowed myself to feel openly before. I knew the truth. I had been in control all along, and no one could take that away from me. Some days, I would catch Kale looking at me differently, a mix of disbelief and caution in his eyes. Others in the family were more careful around me, aware that the quiet sister they had overlooked had been the one quietly managing the family's fortune for years. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The knowledge of my own power was enough. The final moment of quiet victory came in my grandfather's old study, a room I had finally made my own. The shelves still held his books and notes, a reminder of the lessons he had taught me. I was on the phone with Silas Thorne, calmly going over the details of a new investment. This one was different, a multi-million-dollar contribution to a literacy-focused tech startup, something that mattered to me personally and reflected the values Grandpa had always emphasized. I smiled slightly, not because I was proud in a showy way, but because I knew I was finally using power as it was meant to be used, with purpose and care. I had not become Kale, chasing recognition or prestige. I had become the true heir to my grandfather's vision, quietly guiding the family's fortune toward meaningful goals. The revenge I had sought was complete, though it had not been about taking or destroying. The real victory was in showing the family who had been protecting them all along, who had quietly ensured their safety and comfort. I had given them everything they had enjoyed, yet they had never understood until the moment the truth came to light. And now, finally, the burden was gone. I could live my life freely, knowing my grandfather's legacy was safe, the family's security intact, and my own strength fully realized. The quiet victory was mine, and it was more powerful than any grand gesture could have ever been. Do you think I did the right thing by keeping control of the family's fortune and revealing the truth, or should I have handled Kale differently? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out.